Listen closely. Can you hear it? That wet, sucking sound? That's the noise a man's soul makes when it's being slowly extracted through acts of devotion. Like marrow from a bone. Like wine from a broken cask, pooling uselessly on cellar stones. There's an old Bavarian folk tale. Perhaps you've heard it whispered in the corners of beer halls where divorced men gather like moths around amber light. It tells of a woodcutter who loved a maiden so purely, so completely, that he carved her a new gift each day from the heart of an oak tree. First, a comb for her golden hair, then a mirror frame, a jewelry box, a chair, each piece more intricate than the last, each demanding more of the tree's flesh. The maiden smiled. She always smiled, but her smiles grew thinner, like winter sunshine through dirty glass. By spring, the oak was dead. By summer, she had married the merchant who never carved her anything at all. You see, there's a grotesque mathematics to modern affection, a formula they don't teach in those relationship seminars where everyone sits in circles and shares their emotional truths. The equation is this: the more you perform your love, the less it's worth. Like inflation, but for the human heart. Like a magic trick shown too many times until even children yawn at the rabbit. Schopenhauer knew this. Oh, how that bitter sage understood the porcupine's dilemma. Creatures seeking warmth, pricking each other with their quills, forever adjusting distance. But he missed the darker truth. In love's theater, the one who performs most becomes the fool, the jester, the thing that entertains but never commands. Recent psychology studies, those sterile laboratories where love is dissected under fluorescent lights, confirm what folklore always knew. A 2024 paper from the Journal of Interpersonal Dynamics found that relationship satisfaction inversely correlates with performative romantic gestures beyond initial courtship phases. They dress it in academic language, these researchers, but they're simply documenting what every spurned lover discovers at 3 a.m., staring at read receipts that never turn into responses. Watch a man in love. Really watch him. See how he becomes a one-man circus, juggling his dignity like flaming torches, walking tight ropes over chasms of his own making. He texts first. He plans dates. He remembers anniversaries of first smiles, first touches, first disappointments. He studies her moods like a meteorologist studies storm systems, adjusting his behavior to her atmospheric pressure. And what does she do? She receives. Like a goddess accepting burnt offerings, vaguely pleased but fundamentally unmoved. There's something obscene about it, isn't there? This spectacle of masculine devotion, like watching someone water a plastic plant, like seeing a pianist play concertos for an empty concert hall, the velvet seats mocking him with their vacancy. I once knew a man, let's call him Marcus, for all such men deserve Roman names, names that speak of fallen empires, who drove 2 hours every weekend to see a woman who could barely remember his last name. He brought her wildflowers picked from highway medians. He fixed her car, painted her apartment, listened to her complain about other men who didn't text back fast enough. She just needs to see how much I care, Marcus would say, his eyes holding that peculiar glaze of the devotionally deluded. But here's what Marcus never understood. What you might not understand until you've worn your fingers bloody knocking on doors that won't open. Love operates on the principle of scarcity, not abundance. The heart is a contrarian investor. It values what might slip away, not what's guaranteed to stay. Think of it like this, and forgive the cruelty of the comparison, but truth often comes dressed in cruel clothes. Have you ever watched a cat with a mouse? The cat is most engaged when the mouse runs, when it struggles, when it might escape. But a dead mouse, a compliant mouse, the cat loses interest, bats it around half-heartedly, abandons it behind the refrigerator. We are all cats. We are all mice. The tragedy is not knowing which role we're playing until it's too late. The Stoics had a word, pathemata, sufferings, but not just any sufferings. The specific agonies we create through false beliefs. The man who performs his love, who turns himself into a dancing bear hoping for honey, suffers from the greatest pathemata of all. The belief that love can be earned through demonstration. Love cannot be earned. This is the first dark truth, the one that tastes like ash and wine mixed together. Love is not a vending machine where you insert kindness coins until affection tumbles out. Love is a wild thing that comes and goes by its own strange logic, like fog, like fever, like fortune. When you perform your love, when you make it a Broadway show with matinees on weekends, you transform yourself from a mystery to be explored into a problem to be managed. You become the too eager salesman, the over-friendly neighbor, the restaurant that's always empty, making people wonder what's wrong with the food. Tell me, when was the last time you stopped performing? When did you last let silence speak louder than your declarations? When did you realize that your endless audition was playing to an audience that left the theater long ago? The theater of diminishing returns runs the same show every night. The script never changes. Only the actors age, growing more desperate with each performance, not realizing that the very desperation is what empties the seats. But there's a strange liberation in walking off that stage, in letting the curtain fall, in becoming the one who watches rather than the one who performs. The Machiavellian game begins not with cruelty, but with the simple recognition that love responds to absence more than presence, to mystery more than certainty, to the withdrawn hand more than the outstretched one. The woodcutter in our tale? He learned too late. Don't be the woodcutter. Don't kill your oak tree carving gifts for someone who would prefer the shade of a living tree, one that stands tall, indifferent, undiminished by devotion. How absence transforms lead into gold. Shh, lean closer. I'm going to tell you something that will sound like heresy, like the kind of thing they used to burn people for whispering in medieval squares. Indifference is not the opposite of love. It's love's most powerful catalyst. There's a story they tell in the opium dens of 19th century Paris, or perhaps I dreamed it, for the best truths often come dressed as dreams, about a perfumer who created the most intoxicating fragrance ever known. Women would faint at its sweetness. Men would follow its trail through cobblestone streets like sleepwalkers. But the perfumer made a fatal error. He wore it himself, every day, doused himself in it like a baptism of scent. Within a month, no one could smell it on him anymore. The miracle became mundane, the extraordinary became air, but his apprentice, his clever apprentice, stole the formula and improved it. He added one crucial ingredient: absence. He would wear the perfume for 3 days, then nothing for a week. On the 8th day, when he walked through the market square, women turned their heads like sunflowers following light. The scent had become an event, a visitation, a small apocalypse of desire. You're beginning to understand, aren't you? That sick, beautiful truth crawling up your spine like a cold finger. Modern behaviorists call it intermittent reinforcement. Such sterile words for such a savage principle. A 2025 study from the Stockholm Institute of Relational Dynamics found that partners who maintained strategic emotional distance reported 73% higher rates of sustained attraction over 5-year periods. The researchers seemed shocked, as if they'd never watched a gambling addict at a slot machine, pulling the lever precisely because they don't know when the next payout will come. But Kierkegaard knew. In his journals, those midnight confessions of a man who broke off his engagement rather than inflict his melancholy on his beloved, he wrote, "The moment of possession is the moment of loss. To have is to cease wanting. To hold is to stop reaching. Consider the physics of desire. It requires space to move. Compress 2 atoms too closely, and they repel. Leave the perfect distance, and they dance in eternal orbit." This is not cynicism. This is the mathematics of the universe itself, written in the movement of planets and the pull of tides. I'll tell you what calculated indifference looks like, painted in the small cruelties that save us. It looks like reading her message and waiting, not hours. That's amateur work, the fumbling of boys who think love is a game of chicken. No, you wait until waiting becomes natural, until responding immediately would feel like betraying yourself. You wait until you actually have something to say, or nothing at all. It looks like having plans. Real plans. A life that exists beyond the gravitational pull of her attention. When she calls last minute, sometimes you're genuinely unavailable. Not because you're playing games, but because you've remembered that you existed before her and will exist after. It looks like silence after sex. Not cold silence, that's cruelty. And we're not monsters, just men who've learned the economy of attention. But the warm silence of someone who doesn't need to fill every moment with reassurance. The silence that says, I'm here, but I'm also elsewhere. I contain multitudes you haven't discovered. There's an Indonesian myth about a prince who fell in love with the moon. Every night he would climb the highest mountain to get closer to her pale face. He built towers. He trained birds to carry messages. He never missed a single night, this devoted fool. The moon never noticed him, but his brother, the younger prince, he would look at the moon sometimes, when it suited him, when the night was clear and he had nothing better to do. Some nights he preferred the darkness, preferred to light fires and tell stories and forget the sky entirely. Guess which prince the moon fell in love with? Guess who she blessed with tides and dreams and the secret language of wolves? Are you squirming yet? Does this feel like reading your own autopsy report? Good. Discomfort is just recognition wearing an ugly mask. The calculated part, and this is where it becomes alchemy, where lead transforms to gold, is not in being cruel. It's in being complete. You withdraw not to punish, but to replenish. You create distance not to manipulate, but to maintain the essential mystery that keeps love alive. Think of the most intoxicating woman you've known. I guarantee she wasn't the one who texted you good morning every day. She was the one who disappeared for days, then returned with stories that didn't include you. She was the one whose phone contained numbers you didn't recognize, whose laughter had inside jokes you weren't inside of. She was complete unto herself. And that completeness made you want to earn a place in her world rather than have it handed to you like a participation trophy. Now here's the grotesque punchline. We know this about women. We've always known. But we pretend the rules don't apply in reverse. We perform our availability like priests performing mass, hoping devotion will summon divinity. The 2024 Barcelona study on attachment dynamics, conducted on 10,000 couples across 15 countries, found something the researchers called the paradox of proximity. The couples who reported the highest levels of passion were those who maintained what they termed optimal psychological distance. Not physical distance, mind you, but the distance of separate interests, friend groups, occasional mysteries. The distance that says, I choose you rather than I need you. Choice, not need. That's the fulcrum on which desire balances. When you master the alchemy of calculated indifference, something strange happens. You stop being the pursuer and become the space into which others pursue. You become the rare book, not the airport paperback. The vintage wine, not the house pour. The handwritten letter in an age of text messages. But here's what they don't tell you in those pickup artist forums where broken men trade manipulation tactics like baseball cards. True indifference can't be faked. It must be cultivated from actual fullness. You can't pretend to have a life. You must build one. You can't simulate mystery. You must become genuinely mysterious, even to yourself. Nietzsche wrote, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Your calculated indifference should be the calm surface over deep chaos, not the empty posturing of someone with nothing underneath. So I ask you, what would you do tomorrow if you woke up genuinely indifferent to whether she called? Not bitter, not resentful, just complete. What books would you finally read? What mountains would you climb? What version of yourself would you become if you stopped performing and started simply being? The alchemy only works when the indifference is real gold, not pyrite. When you truly have somewhere else to be, something else to love, someone else to become. When your absence isn't a punishment but a gift, the gift of missing you, of wondering about you, of remembering why you mattered in the first place. The apprentice perfumer. He ended up with a shop on the Rue de Rivoli, and women would travel from across Europe just to catch his scent on the days he chose to wear it. But by then, he had discovered something even more intoxicating than being desired: being complete. The moon still rises, with or without princes watching. Perhaps it's time you learned her secret. There's a Romanian proverb, whispered by grandmothers who've buried more husbands than they care to count, that goes, "The vampire who forgets how to hunt must learn to love the taste of his own blood." Grotesque, isn't it? The image. Your tongue recoils from it. But stay with me in this darkness a moment longer, because we're about to discuss something even more disturbing. The man who feeds on female validation like it's the only sustenance that matters. You know him. Maybe you are him. Maybe you were him last Tuesday at 2:47 a.m., scrolling through her Instagram, analyzing the subtext of every emoji, feeding on digital crumbs like a pigeon in an empty plaza. Let me paint you a portrait in shades of shadow and shame. He wakes up and checks if she's viewed his story. His morning coffee tastes bitter or sweet depending on her response time. He crafts messages like a medieval scribe illuminating manuscripts. Every word chosen, every punctuation mark weighted with meaning she'll never decode because she's not looking that closely. She's never looking that closely. He's the vampire who's forgotten that blood comes from veins, not from the hope of veins. A 2025 Harvard study on validation-seeking behavior in digital romance found something that would be hilarious if it weren't so tragic. Men who exhibited high levels of approval-seeking behavior reported feeling emptier with each positive response received, like drinking salt water, like scratching an itch until it bleeds. The more validation they consumed, the more they craved, the less it satisfied. The researchers called it hedonic adaptation to affirmation. I call it the vampire's paradox. Those who hunger most shall feast the least. But here's where it gets interesting, where the darkness shows its teeth. In Transylvanian folklore, the original vampires weren't the suave romantic figures we've sanitized them into. They were strigoi, restless spirits who couldn't find peace because they'd left something unfinished in life. Usually, it was self-respect. Usually, it was their own name they'd forgotten how to speak. Sound familiar? The modern man circling his phone like a hungry ghost, waiting for her to confirm he exists. I once observed, with the fascination of an entomologist studying a particularly tragic species of moth, a friend named David, who would literally change his weekend plans based on a woman's Instagram activity. She posts a photo at a farmer's market. David suddenly develops a passion for organic vegetables. She's at a wine tasting. David enrolls in a sommelier course. She mentions liking men who read. David's apartment fills with books he'll never open, props in a play she's not watching. David was feeding, constantly feeding. But on what? On the possibility that if he shaped himself into her perfect man, she might finally see him. But here's what David never understood, what the vampire forgets when he stops hunting and starts hoping. Desire is not attracted to mirrors. It's attracted to windows. When you become a validation vampire, you transform yourself into a mirror, reflecting back what you think she wants to see. But mirrors are useful, not fascinating. We glance at them and move on. Windows, though. Windows show different worlds. Windows make us stop and stare and wonder what's beyond. Schopenhauer wrote, "We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves in order to be like other people. But when you're a validation vampire, you forfeit 4/4. You forfeit quarters that don't even exist. You become a negative space, a vacancy sign in human form. The hunger shows in 1,000 small surrenders, laughing at jokes that aren't funny, agreeing with opinions that revolt you, pretending interests you don't possess, swallowing your own preferences like bitter pills, reshaping your personality like it's made of warm clay. Each surrender feeds the hunger instead of satisfying it. Because, and this is the cosmic joke that makes devils laugh, validation from someone you've tricked into giving it is worthless. It's monopoly money. It's a love letter written to your costume, not your face. The 2024 Tokyo Institute study on authenticity and attraction discovered that women could detect validation-seeking behavior with 87% accuracy within the first 3 interactions. They described it as a kind of energetic desperation that made them feel responsible for someone else's emotional state. One participant said, "It's like being cast as someone's mother without auditioning for the role." Ouch, did that sting? Good. Truth is supposed to sting. That's how you know it's medicine, not candy. But here's the plot twist in our vampire tale. The thing that transforms curse into cure. The moment you stop feeding on external validation is the moment you discover you were never actually hungry. The craving was a hallucination, a phantom limb pain from an ego that never fully formed. You were complete all along, just convinced you were broken by a culture that profits from your emptiness. Watch what happens when a validation vampire remembers how to hunt properly, not for approval, but for experience. Not for confirmation, but for conquest of his own limitations. He develops tastes that disgust her and doesn't care. He spends Saturday building something useless in his garage instead of crafting the perfect text. He laughs at his own jokes, especially the ones she doesn't understand. He becomes nutritionally complete, emotionally self-sufficient, validation autonomous. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor darker than mine, that's when she starts texting first. That's when she wonders what he's building in that garage. That's when his jokes become funny, his interests become fascinating, his absence becomes presence. The vampire who remembers how to hunt never goes hungry, but more importantly, he never feeds on scraps again. There's a modern Romanian saying, perhaps I made it up just now, but truth doesn't care about its birth certificate. The vampire who learns to walk in sunlight no longer fears the dawn. When you stop needing her validation to feel real, you become real, solid, substantial, a thing that casts shadows instead of hiding in them. So here's my question, whispered from one recovering vampire to another. What would you build tomorrow if you knew she'd never see it? What joke would you tell if she'd never laugh? What man would you become if her opinion became as relevant as a stranger's weather forecast for a city you'll never visit? That man, the one who doesn't need her blood to survive, that's the man she's been looking for all along. The tragic irony is that he's also the man who no longer needs her to be looking. The vampire's paradox resolves itself in the simplest, most difficult way possible. Stop feeding on others. Start feasting on your own becoming. The hunger ends when you realize you were always the meal, the diner, and the satisfaction. No more circling, no more hoping, no more feeding on maybes and perhapses and if-onlys. The hunt begins again, but this time you're both predator and prey, chasing the only validation that matters, your own. Where silence speaks louder than any love song. Listen. Do you hear that? That's the sound of a man discovering he enjoys his own company. It sounds like heresy. It sounds like freedom. It sounds like nothing at all. In the mountains of Tibet, there's a monastery where monks take a vow of silence that lasts exactly 1,000 days. No words, no gestures, no acknowledgement of the outside world, just breath and thought. And the terrible, beautiful confrontation with whoever they really are beneath the noise. The villagers below call them the already dead. But when these monks finally descend, something peculiar happens. Women who previously ignored them suddenly find reasons to linger at the market stalls where they shop. Men seek their counsel without knowing why. Children follow them through dusty streets like they're following music only they can hear. The monks emit something, not pheromones, something stranger. They emit completeness. I'm going to tell you something about solitude that will sound like madness to a generation raised on read receipts and relationship status updates. The monastery of one is where boys become men worth wanting. Not the performative solitude of the heartbroken. That's just loneliness wearing a costume. Not the bitter isolation of the rejected. That's just prison with invisible bars. I'm talking about the deliberate, luxurious, almost erotic choice to be alone with yourself until yourself becomes enough. The 2025 Zurich study on solitude and sexual market value, such clinical language for such a mystical transformation, found that men who spent at least 3 months in purposeful solitude, no dating apps, minimal social media, deliberate single status, showed remarkable changes. 68% increase in what researchers called authentic confidence indicators. Testosterone levels stabilized at optimal ranges. Brain scans showed increased activity in regions associated with self-reflection and decreased activity in areas linked to social anxiety. Most bizarrely, their natural scent chemically changed, becoming more attractive to potential partners. The researchers were baffled. I'm not. They'd simply documented what happens when a man stops being a beggar at love's banquet and starts being the feast itself. Let me paint you a scene from the monastery of one. It's Friday night. Your phone sits silent, not on airplane mode, that's cheating. Silent because you've trained the world to expect your absence. You're reading a book about Antarctic exploration, feeling the frostbite through prose. Or you're learning to cook something that requires more patience than you previously possessed. Or you're writing letters to yourself 10 years in the future, asking questions you're not ready to answer. Your married friends think you're depressed. Your single friends think you're lying about not having plans. Your ex thinks, well, she doesn't think about you at all anymore, and that's the point. You've become unobservable, like a quantum particle that exists in all states simultaneously until someone tries to measure you. But here's what happens in the monastery of one. Here's the secret the monks know. You start having conversations with yourself that are more interesting than any you've had on dates. You discover you're funnier than you thought, stranger than you knew, deeper than you dared explore. You realize you've been performing yourself for so long that you'd forgotten who was beneath the performance. Kierkegaard, patron saint of the gloriously alone, wrote, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. But in the monastery of one, you discover something else. The most liberating state is forgetting the future you thought you needed and discovering the present you actually inhabit." Does this sound like giving up? Like the consolation prize for the romantically defeated? Then you're not listening closely enough. Lean in. Hear the difference between loneliness and solitude. One is a wound. The other is a weapon. The Japanese have a concept. Ikigai. Your reason for being. Most men think their ikigai is found in a woman's eyes. The monastery of one teaches a different truth. Ikigai is found in the moment you stop looking for it outside yourself. It's the moment you realize you're not half of something waiting to be whole. You're already whole. Just convinced you're broken by a culture that profits from your incompleteness. I know a man, let's call him Thomas, because saints deserve saintly names, who entered his monastery of one after his divorce. Not by choice at first. She'd left him for someone who texted back faster, who performed love better, who hadn't yet exhausted himself in the theater of devotion. Thomas spent the first month drowning. Dating apps like life rafts. Desperate texts to anyone with ovaries and a pulse. The usual masculine panic at the prospect of unwitnessed existence. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the morning he realized he'd slept until noon without guilt. Maybe it was the evening he cooked lamb shanks for one and used the good wine and lit candles like he was seducing himself. 6 months later, I saw Thomas at a bookstore. He was reading poetry in the philosophy section, mixing categories like a madman. A woman approached him, beautiful in that nervous way of someone used to being the approached, and asked what he was reading. Thomas looked up slowly, like he was returning from another dimension. He showed her the book, explained why Rumi belonged next to Wittgenstein, then went back to reading. Not rudely, just completely. She stood there for 30 seconds, waiting for him to perform the dance of availability. When he didn't, she wrote her number on a bookmark and slipped it into his book. Thomas told me later he found it 3 days later and laughed. Not cruelly, just at the cosmic joke of it all. He texted her eventually. From curiosity, not need. They've been together 2 years now. She still complains he's too comfortable alone. He considers this a compliment. The monastery of one teaches you things. How to eat alone in restaurants without checking your phone. How to wake up without immediately wondering who's thinking of you. How to have orgasms that aren't performances for someone else's ego. How to be bored without panic. How to be excited without witnesses. How to be complete without confirmation. A 2024 study from the Melbourne Institute found that men who practiced conscious solitude for extended periods showed decreased cortisol levels, improved immune function, and, this is the kicker, increased attractiveness ratings from potential partners who viewed their photographs. The researchers theorized it was something in the eyes, a quality of self-possession that can't be faked. So here's my challenge, whispered from one monk to another potential initiate. Can you spend this weekend entirely alone without calling it loneliness? Can you turn off the apps, silence the notifications, and discover what thoughts arrive when you stop drowning them in digital noise? Can you seduce yourself before expecting anyone else to find you seductive? The monastery of one isn't about becoming a hermit. It's about becoming humidity, completely present, needing nothing, affecting everything. It's about discovering that the love you've been seeking in others' eyes has been sitting in your chest all along, patient as a cat, waiting for you to stop looking elsewhere. When you emerge from your 1,000 days of silence, or your 1,000 hours, let's be realistic. You'll emit that same strange frequency the Tibetan monks carry, the frequency of the complete, the holy unto themselves, the absolutely undevastated by solitude. And that's when they'll come looking. They always do, drawn like moths to the flame of a man who's learned the most dangerous secret of all. He doesn't need them to burn. Why the kingdom was always yours to lose. There's a Serbian legend about a king who loved a witch. Not a beautiful witch from Disney tales. A real witch, with soil under her nails and prophecies that tasted like copper pennies. Every morning she would place a crown of thorns upon his head and whisper, "This is what love feels like." Every morning he would bleed. Every morning he would thank her. The kingdom fell, of course, not from invasion or plague, but from a king too busy bleeding to notice he was already dead. I'm going to tell you the last truth now, the one that tastes like funeral wine, the one that will either liberate you or destroy you, depending on how honest you're willing to be at this late hour when even the shadows have shadows. You forge your own crown of thorns, every single thorn, with your own hands, in the blacksmith shop of your desperate need to be chosen. And here's the truly grotesque part, the part that would make Dostoevsky weep into his vodka. You could take it off anytime, but you don't, because the pain has become proof that you're alive, that you're loving, that you're a good man who deserves to be loved back eventually, someday, if you just bleed enough. Let me show you the thorns, one by one, like a collector showing his prized stamps of suffering. The thorn of infinite availability. You've made yourself a 24-hour convenience store of emotional labor. Always open, always stocked with whatever she needs, never closed for inventory, never shuttered for renovation. The fluorescent lights of your availability have given you a permanent migraine, but you've mistaken it for passion. The thorn of retrospective revision. You rewrite history with every rejection. She wasn't ready. The timing was wrong. If only I'd said this instead of that. You're a Soviet historian, airbrushing painful truths from the photograph of your past. But the ghosts remain, transparent but present, mocking your revisions. The thorn of competitive suffering. You measure your worth by your capacity to endure. Other men would have given up by now, but not you. You're special, you're devoted. You're the marathon runner of unrequited love, and surely the universe keeps score. Surely there's a medal waiting at a finish line that keeps moving. The thorn of sacrificial arithmetic. You keep a ledger in your head. Every compromise, every swallowed preference, every time you chose her happiness over yours. You're waiting for the cosmic accountant to balance the books, to pay you back with interest. But love isn't a bank. It's a casino, and the house always wins. The thorn of tomorrow's promise. You live in the future tense. When she realizes, when she heals, when she sees. When. Meanwhile, the present tense bleeds out on the floor, unnoticed, unnamed, unlived. A 2025 comprehensive study from the Global Institute of Relationship Dynamics, 50,000 participants across 30 countries, found something that should be carved into stone tablets and thrown through the windows of every man wearing his crown of thorns. Persistent attachment to non-reciprocal romantic interests correlates with decreased life satisfaction across every measured domain. Career advancement, physical health, creative output, social connections, and paradoxically, future romantic success. In other words, your crown of thorns isn't just killing you. It's making you less attractive to everyone, including the one you're bleeding for. But here's where Machiavelli enters our story. Not as villain, but as dark liberator. He wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." The crown of thorns is all appearance. It's theater. It's performance art, where you're both artist and canvas, painting yourself in shades of noble suffering. Take a breath. Feel that? That's the weight of recognition. That's the moment you realize you're not the hero of a romantic tragedy. You're the architect of your own prison, and you've been calling it a castle. I knew a man. We'll call him Stephen, because this level of self-destruction deserves a name that sounds like martyrdom, who wore his crown for 7 years. 7 biblical years. Locust years, years that devoured themselves. She was married, then divorced, then dating others, then single, then dating again. Through every season, Stefan waited like a faithful dog at a grave, not realizing the person buried there was himself. He turned down promotions that would take him to other cities. He rejected women who showed actual interest. He kept his apartment arranged exactly how she'd once said she liked it, even though she'd only visited twice. His crown grew heavier, the thorns deeper, until even his friends stopped trying to remove it. They could see he'd grown to love the pain more than he'd ever loved her. One night, and it's always one night, isn't it, when the fever breaks? Stefan got drunk on expensive whiskey and cheap clarity. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror and saw it. The crown. Not metaphorically. He swears he saw it. Thorns and blood and the whole grotesque prop from his one-man passion play. He reached up and touched it, then pulled. The sound, he said, was like roots being torn from soil, like habits dying, like hope finally, mercifully expiring. What remained wasn't pretty. Scars. Bare patches where parts of himself had died, but also, and this is the miracle that hides in every tragedy, space. Space for new growth. Space for thoughts that weren't about her. Space for a life that wasn't an elaborate altar to someone else's indifference. The Buddhists have a saying, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Your crown of thorns is optional. Every morning you put it on again is a choice. Every thorn you polish with your tears is a decision. Every drop of blood you offer to an absent goddess is a vote for your own diminishment. So here's my final question, posed from one recovering king to another. What would you do with all that blood if you kept it for yourself? What would you build with hands that weren't always reaching? What would you become if you stopped practicing for a martyrdom that nobody asked you to perform? The kingdom was always yours. You've just been too busy bleeding to rule it. Take off the crown. I know it's fused to your skull by now. I know it feels like part of you. Like removing it would be removing your very identity as a man who loves deeply, truly, eternally. But that's the final lie, the last thorn, the ultimate deception. You are not your suffering. You are not your devotion to someone who doesn't want it. You are not the protagonist in a romance novel written by sadists. You are a man with a finite number of days and an infinite capacity to waste them on people who wouldn't notice if you disappeared tomorrow. Or, and here's the revolutionary thought, the heretical possibility. You're a man who could stop bleeding and start living. The witch in our Serbian legend? She wasn't evil. She was honest. She showed the king exactly what his version of love looked like. Voluntary crucifixion. The kingdom didn't fall because of her curse. It fell because he refused to stop believing that pain was proof of purpose. Your crown of thorns is not a badge of honor. It's a weight you've grown too comfortable carrying. But comfort and happiness have never been the same thing. One is familiar. The other is free. The choice, as it always was, is yours. Remove the crown. Rule your kingdom. Let someone else play the martyr. The thorns will heal. The scars will fade. And one day, you'll meet someone who loves you without requiring you to bleed for the privilege. But first, you have to stop forging new thorns. First, you have to choose yourself. First, you have to believe you deserve a love that doesn't require a crown of thorns as the price of admission. The coronation is over. The real reign begins now.